This episode of the Red Sociology 101 podcast is titled State of the Empire, Still on Our Necks. Now you may ask why I start with that title. This podcast is in particular a quick response to President Obama's State of the Union address that he gave earlier yesterday, now that it's past midnight. At first I was going to write a blog post about it, write an actual article describing how I felt about it, but I felt that it wouldn't be quite accurate to describe my feelings of the situation. My initial thoughts on the State of the Union address when I first watched it, which was about one-third of the way through, was, okay, normal Obama talking about this policy, that policy, trying to counter Republican. Basically, the good chunk of the speech was campaigning. Then things started to get real for me when he moved into foreign policy. Now, he made mention of Osama bin Laden and Gaddafi and support for the Arab Spring protests and people's right for democracy and all that jazz. Now, a lot of people went and was like, that was a great intelligent speech that Obama gave, etc., etc., etc. And most of them probably was listening to the campaign policy part of the speech. Many people, I feel, just were not really listening to what he was saying in the foreign policy part of the speech. There, he more or less gloated about the death of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and the death of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. And what people don't understand is that in the road from 9/11 to the death of Osama bin Laden, America has killed over 1 million Iraqi civilians, tens of thousands of Afghan civilians, thousands of Pakistani civilians, and thousands of other people across the Middle East and across the world who dared to resist America's bloodlust to avenge itself for the death of 3,000 people on September 11, 2001. Now, a lot of us don't really question the logic of that, but you have to think about it. We lost 3,000 people. Most of them working in the World Trade Center, which is a financial building, whose occupants were part and parcel involved in a lot of the abuse and the rapes of the country from which the terrorists who bombed it came from. They were retaliating against American capitalism. They weren't necessarily retaliating against Americans. They were angry enough to fly a plane to a building to kill themselves. Not because they were radical Muslims, but because they understood who was funding the dictatorship and the strongmen and all these horrible regimes and practices that's been going on in the Middle East for years, including Israel. Now, after that, we decide we're going to go on a rampage and basically kill any and everybody that had anything maybe to do with 9/11. Unfortunately, we forgot to go out to Saudi Arabia, seeing as most of the men on that plane were from that country, and Saudi Arabia is an intense hotbed of quote-unquote radical Islam. Partly because the royal family of Saudi Arabia, which is a vestige of British imperialism, very much supports American troops and the American exorbitant lifestyle in a way that is very offensive to many of the people that live within that country. This is the backstory behind the words that Obama is saying. Look at Libya. We're talking about the overthrowing and the intervention in a sovereign country's affairs and trying to defend its government from people who sought to overthrow it. Now, just as much as I believe people have a right to protest and to ask grievance of their government, and when they feel necessary to pick up arms against it, also feel that it is the sovereign right and pretty much the duty of the state to protect itself from being destroyed. Now, you look at the civil war going on in Libya, and you see the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians, the bombing of key social, political, and economic facilities in the country that will take years to rebuild. You see the killing of Gaddafi's grandchildren, who were in the house that was not a military institution, not near a military institution outside of Tripoli, and that was specifically targeted because they thought that key Gaddafi officials were in that building. Now, in any other world, that would be called murder. Whether you thought somebody was there or not, blowing up a house and killing babies is murder. In our world, apparently, that is something to be celebrated. And it very much disturbed me that Obama goes up in front of the world and literally gloats about violating international law, violating the human rights of these individuals, and violating the rights of these countries to be self-determining in a good way or a bad way. On the other hand, you do like Osama bin Laden. This is a horrible man, in my opinion, who has done, things that would be considered war crime and crimes against humanity. It should have went to trial for him. Unfortunately, he never got that chance because America decided, unlike all the rhetoric that we have about democracy and the rule of law, that doesn't apply to people we don't like. So in the same way that we assassinated many other leaders throughout our history, we assassinated bin Laden, and once again, like with Gaddafi, we go in front of the world and gloat and kind of, flash our we don't give a F about international law card. And that was really my initial feelings about the foreign policy bit, is just, kind of the sickening sort of happiness he felt. And, and saying this, and the fact that people clapped and were like, yeah, go, President Obama, kill them in efforts, blah. But going to the very end of the speech, I think is the part that is most important to me as an African and as somebody of African descent that lives in this country. And, not to quote it directly, but he's, in his speech, was a statement about when I look at the flag. And he said all these nice things about when he looks at the flag, it gives him hope, that we're not in decline, that we're going to, get back on our feet, and we're going to become and stay a great country, number one in the world, etc., etc., etc. And it smacked of American exceptionalism is what it really was. My problem is that it's one thing if President Bush, Reagan, Clinton, Jefferson, or Andrew Jackson was staying here saying this. These are white men who are the beneficiaries of America's society, its creation, its evolution, and its current history. But in this case, this is somebody of African descent saying the same thing. And I have a serious problem with that. For a simple fact that his ancestors and mine were victims of that flag. And in response, I would tell President Obama, when I look at that flag, I see the civilizations, the individuals, and the ideas that were destroyed and trampled upon in order for that flag to be planted on the soil. When I see that flag, I see my ancestors, both Native American and African, who were enslaved and taken their right to be a human being in the creation of this country. When I look at that flag, I see the untold destruction, and I'm repeating this so that you guys get the point. That flag is a symbol for most of the world of tyranny, dictatorship, death, straight up, is what it is. Yet, within our borders, we look at this flag and we see freedom and democracy and the right to speech and the right to be an entrepreneur and all this stuff. And for me, I look on Facebook and I see most of my friends who are of African descent, who are black, going riding along and cheering. And I'm not understanding it, because if any of these people take the time to look out their window or go on Facebook the next day, they'll see all the evil and bad results of that American flag. For me, I have absolutely no allegiance to America as a social system and as an institution, for a simple fact that the same racism, classism, and colonial fervor that it was built on in the beginning of its history, on the backs of my ancestors, is still in place today. It's just that they're not calling us the N-word. They're not going out and just straight up slaughtering people that don't agree with the government. They're just doing this stuff abroad. They're just locking you up and saying Guantanamo. They're just passing laws to put you into indefinite detention, which is one of Obama's nice little achievements. And this is where I think the State Union Dress really teaches us a lesson that we need to go out and teach other people, is that when these politicians go and speak about these things, you have to think about, not only does it sound good, does it sound reasonable, etc., etc. We need to think about the lives that they affect when these words are put into action, the lives they have affected when these words are reflecting action that have been taken. Millions of people's lives have been affected by the words said by this man today. They are going to be affected, they have been affected. His actions have affected many more times that. And when we really look at the equation at the end of the day, regardless of how much better he may be than the Republicans, he still has the blood of millions of people on his hands through either his apathy, through either his weakness in challenging the Republicans, or through his active participation in what can be considered war crimes. So what if he got a Nobel Peace Prize? So what if he got healthcare reform passed? So what if he says he's been fighting for the middle class? At the end of the day, you don't have food on your table, you don't have a job, you don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to get those is going to be revolution. And not even necessarily just a violent revolution of flaming pitchforks and bombs and, burning and blowing up buildings on anarchy and stuff. But a revolution of mind where you don't just accept the premise on which you've been told is the truth about our society. Once you're able to question, you're able to act. And right now, none of us are questioning anything. We're watching this speech and we're just like, oh man, that sounds reasonable, let me go along with it. And that will ultimately be our downfall. Because just like what's going on here now, the German civilians, when they heard Hitler talking about his economic policy, it sounded reasonable. Thus, they went along with it. And we see where it got them. Unfortunately for us, the stakes are much higher. What's at stake is nuclear warfare. What's at stake is the threat of the destruction of our civilization and of our world through economic and environmental disaster. We won't have another chance if we don't get this right. So in 2012, if you're going to vote for President Obama or the Republicans, or you're going to vote at all and participate in the system, you need to think about these things, that we are on the brink of a global irreconcilable crisis. And if we don't get it right this time, we probably won't have another chance. So once everybody's done being porked by Obama's swag, let's start to think, let's start to reason, let's start to question, and let's get organized.